welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we are stepping into the world of habits, taking a close look at a collection of excerpts from a book that has, well, really captured the zeitgeist and offered millions a new way to think about their behavior. That's right. Our source material today really dives deep into the underlying mechanisms of human behavior, specifically exploring this powerful idea that incredibly small, seemingly insignificant changes can accumulate over time to produce quite remarkable results.
And our mission for this deep dive is really to unpack why these sources suggest this particular framework is worth your time and what the absolute key actionable insights are that it offers you. It presents itself as a practical step-by-step guide for building good habits and, just as importantly, breaking the bad ones.
Yeah, focusing on how tiny adjustments can create massive shifts. It's a really appealing concept.
It is. So let's get into it and unpack this. Where do we start? Absolutely. To truly appreciate the weight of the ideas presented, I think it's incredibly helpful to start with the author's own origin story as detailed in the sources. James Clear, the author, experienced a life-altering event during his sophomore year of high school.
Oh, yeah. What happened?
He was playing baseball and got hit directly in the face by a swinging bat.
Ouch. Wow. That sounds horrific.
Yeah.
What were the immediate consequences?
They were severe. Really severe. He suffered a broken nose, multiple facial fractures, and his left eye was actually bulging out of its socket.
Oh my God.
He was rushed to the hospital, had emergency surgery just to fix his vision and prevent permanent damage. For weeks afterward, he had double vision. He literally couldn't see the world clearly.
And that wasn't all, was it?
No. He even experienced seizures requiring significant time in the hospital and just a long, difficult road to recovery.
It must have been incredibly disorienting and frightening, not just physically, but the loss of autonomy, the uncertainty,
Exactly. He describes a point where he was practicing basic motor patterns in physical therapy, things we totally take for granted, like walking in a straight line.
Wow.
He faced months of intense rehabilitation. There were moments where he felt profoundly depressed and overwhelmed, acutely aware of how far away he was from his previous life, his previous abilities.
So this wasn't a quick fix, not by a long shot. It was a long, arduous process of getting back to baseline and then presumably beyond.
Precisely. And this is where the connection to the book's core ideas really solidifies. He emphasizes repeatedly that his journey back, both physically and later in other areas of his life, wasn't characterized by one single dramatic breakthrough.
No magic moment.
No sudden heroic effort. Instead, he describes it as a gradual evolution, a long series of small wins and tiny breakthroughs.
Small wins, tiny breakthroughs.
Right. In the context of his injury, starting small, making incremental progress was literally the only choice he had available to him. He couldn't just leap back to where he was.
That difficult, forced experience with slow, consistent effort really planted the seed for the entire framework then.
It absolutely did. He later took that fundamental lesson, the power of starting small and focusing on tiny, consistent improvements, and intentionally applied it. He applied it to building his own business and ultimately to writing the book itself.
How did that play out?
Well, he started back in November 2012 by making a commitment to publish articles on his website, jamesclear.com, twice a week.
Just 2 articles a week. That doesn't sound like the start of something world-changing on its own, does it?
That's exactly the point.
Yeah.
That small, consistent writing habit, that start small strategy, began to compound rapidly.
Really?
Yeah. Within just a few months, those twice-weekly articles attracted his first 1,000 email subscribers. By the end of 2013, that number had exploded to over 30,000.
30,000, wow.
And it kept going. In 2014, it topped 100,000 subscribers, making his newsletter one of the fastest growing online at the time.
That kind of growth is astounding. But the sources say he mentions feeling like an imposter during this period.
He does. He writes about feeling like an imposter when he first started publishing his notes and thoughts. Despite rapidly gaining recognition as an expert on habits, he felt uncomfortable with the label.
Why was that?
From his perspective, he wasn't some established guru. He felt like he was still experimenting, still figuring things out right alongside his readers.
Yeah, I think a lot of people can relate to that gap between how others perceive you and how you feel inside, especially when you're on a steep learning curve yourself.
Totally relatable. And the growth continued. By 2015, his audience had grown to over 200,000 subscribers.
Incredible.
And this massive platform directly led to new business opportunities he hadn't necessarily planned for. Companies and conferences started asking him to speak about habit formation, behavior change, continuous improvement, all these topics he was writing about.
So the writing opened doors.
Big time. And signing the book deal with Penguin Random House that same year was a direct consequence of the platform he had built through that consistent, incremental effort. Just showing up twice a week.
So this isn't just some biographical anecdote he throws in. It's the living proof woven right into the fabric of the book itself.
Exactly. It's the foundation. It shows you, the listener, that these ideas aren't just abstract theories pulled from an ivory tower. They are deeply rooted in a personal struggle, a forced real-world application of incremental progress.
Yeah.
And then the intentional use of that same philosophy to build a successful career and create the very work we're discussing. It demonstrates that the framework works in practice, not just in theory, and even under significant adversity.
That personal journey is such a powerful illustration of the core thesis then, which is the seemingly simple but profoundly impactful idea that small habits matter.
A lot. That's the fundamental concept. Tiny changes really can lead to remarkable results. The sources introduce this through the idea of compounding.
Compounding, like with money.
Exactly. We're familiar with compounding in finance, how small investments grow into massive wealth over time. The argument here is that habits compound in the exact same way.
So you might not see a big change day one or even week one, but over months and years, those small daily actions create exponential change.
Yeah.
Both good and bad, presumably.
Both good and bad, precisely. The sources use clear, vivid examples. Your financial habits, how you spend, save, and invest each day, they're really a lagging measure of your eventual wealth or your poverty.
Okay.
Your weight isn't arbitrary. It's a lagging measure of your eating habits and activity levels over time. Your knowledge is a lagging measure of your learning habits, how much you read, how much you practice, even your clutter.
Oh, yeah, don't remind me.
It's a lagging measure of your cleaning habits or, lack thereof. The simple, undeniable truth is presented as, you get what you repeat.
You get what you repeat. That phrase really sticks with you, doesn't it? It feels both empowering if your habits are good and maybe a bit alarming if they're not.
It absolutely is. The sources explain that if you want a powerful way to predict where you'll end up in life, you just need to look at the trajectory of your current, tiny daily habits.
Those small gains or losses.
Right. And project how they will compound over 10 or 20 years. Are you consistently spending less than you earn? Are you genuinely making it to the gym each week, year after year? Are you reading, learning, and applying something new every single day? These seemingly small daily battles are where the war for your future self is really won or lost.
Time, then, isn't just passing. It's actively magnifying the impact of those daily choices. It's like a lever.
It magnifies the margin between success and failure. Those small gains or losses accumulate. And this is where a major challenge arises, one that derails so many people trying to make positive changes.
What's that?
The most powerful outcomes of compounding are delayed.
Delayed outcomes, right. You put in the work, but you don't see the results immediately. That sounds like the perfect recipe for giving up, or as the sources call it, the valley of disappointment.
It is. Because those powerful outcomes are not immediate, it is incredibly common to hit what the sources vividly describe as the valley of disappointment.
Okay.
This is the stage you inevitably go through in the early and middle periods of any new endeavor, any quest to build a new habit or skill.
What does that actually feel like when you're in it? Because I think we've all been there.
It feels incredibly frustrating. You expect progress to be linear, right? Like climbing stairs step by step. But changing habits and building new systems doesn't work like a straight line.
Not at all.
You make changes, you invest effort, time, and energy, but for days, weeks, even months on end, the tangible, visible results seem minimal. Or even non-existent. It feels like you're putting in all this work and absolutely nothing is happening. Like you're spinning your wheels or stuck on a plateau.
And that lack of immediate feedback must be profoundly discouraging. It makes you question if it's even worth continuing.
Right.
It is presented as one of the primary reasons why it's so difficult for people to build habits that actually last. But here's the key. You haven't lost your ability to improve. You haven't failed. You just haven't yet crossed what the sources call the plateau of latent potential.
Plateau of latent potential. Okay, unpack that.
All the work you've been doing isn't wasted effort. It's being stored. Like potential energy building up or maybe geological pressure deep underground. It's accumulating.
Stored pressure. So the energy is building unseen beneath the surface until it reaches some kind of critical point.
Exactly. The sources use a brilliant and relatable analogy for this. They say complaining about not achieving success despite working hard is like complaining that an ice cube hasn't melted when you heat a room from, say, 25 degrees Fahrenheit to 31 degrees.
Okay.
Your work wasn't wasted, you were adding energy, it's just being stored as potential. All the dramatic, visible action happens at 32 degrees, the melting point. Ah, I see. So you're adding heat, adding effort, the internal state is changing, but the visible state doesn't change until you hit that specific threshold, and then boom, everything melts.
Yes. And when you finally do break through the plateau of latent potential and hit that melting point, the outside world often looks at it and calls it an overnight success.
Right. Suddenly you're successful.
But as the sources make clear, the outside world only sees the dramatic event. The melting ice cube, the sudden business success, the rapid weight loss. They don't see the years of quiet, often frustrating work that preceded it.
The time spent in the valley.
You know that it was all that effort you put in long ago during the valley of disappointment when it genuinely felt like you weren't making any progress at all. That was accumulating the potential energy that made the sudden breakthrough possible. It's the human equivalent of that geological pressure finally releasing in a dramatic event, built on years of slow accumulation. That completely changes the narrative around overnight success and really hammers home the importance of persevering through that difficult invisible phase. It's about trusting the process, isn't it? Even when the results aren't showing up yet.
It is. And this connects directly to a crucial shift in focus that the sources strongly advocate for, moving away from an over-reliance on goals and towards building effective systems.
Goals versus systems. Okay, this is a big one. We're so conditioned to be goal-oriented. Set smart goals, visualize the outcome, aim for the target. What could possibly be the issue with focusing solely on goals? Seems counterintuitive.
The sources present several powerful arguments against making goals the only or even primary focus. Problem number one is fundamental. We tend to think the problem is needing to change our results.
Yeah, that's what we want, right? Different results.
But results, as we just discussed with compounding, are a lagging measure of your habits. They are a reflection of the system that produced them. The problem isn't the result itself, it's the underlying system.
So if you just chase the result without fixing the process that creates it, it's like a temporary fix at best, a Band-Aid.
Exactly. Solving problems purely at the results level is like putting a bandage on a symptom. It might offer temporary relief. But if you want lasting, fundamental improvement, you need to solve problems at the systems level.
Okay.
You need to fix the inputs, design a better process, and the desired outputs will naturally follow. It's about building the engine, not just wishing for a faster car.
That makes sense. Like if your goal is to write a book, just focusing on the finished manuscript isn't enough. You need a writing system, scheduled time, maybe a daily word count, an editing process.
Precisely. Problem number two, the sources highlight, is that goals can actually restrict your happiness.
Restrict happiness? How so?
There's an implicit assumption built into a lot of goal setting. Once I reach this goal, then I will be happy.
Ah, the I'll be happy when trap.
Exactly. This means your happiness is constantly contingent on achieving the next milestone, perpetually deferred until some future point. The author shares his own experience falling into this exact trap during his writing and business building journey. Happiness was always something for his future self to enjoy once he hit X subscribers or sold Y books.
So happiness becomes a destination you never quite arrive at because there's always a new goal popping up on the horizon.
Right. And problem number three is that goals create this stark either-or conflict. You either achieve the specific goal by the specific deadline and you're deemed a success, or you fall short and you're labeled a failure.
Which can be incredibly demoralizing, especially knowing about that valley of disappointment phase where results are delayed anyway.
Definitely. It sets you up for potential failure and disappointment based on an arbitrary timeline.
And the proposed alternative focus is building systems. That's the key.
Yes. The sources strongly advocate for focusing on building effective systems instead. If your focus is on the system, the daily process of showing up, making incremental improvements, you can find satisfaction and feel a sense of progress each day.
Even if you haven't hit the big outcome goal yet.
Right. Even if you haven't hit a specific distant outcome goal yet. It shifts the perspective from a high-stakes pass-fail event to a continuous process of refinement and improvement.
Focusing on the process feels less like standing on a cliff edge and more like walking a continuous path. Less pressure, maybe?
It absolutely does. And the most profound shift happens when you take the system focus and apply it not just to what you do, but who you fundamentally are.
Which brings us to the power of identity. This feels like it cuts right to the core of long-term sustainable change. This is where it gets really interesting, I think.
It really does. The sources introduce this powerful concept. Your behaviors are, at their root, a reflection of your identity. What you consistently do is a strong indication of the type of person you believe yourself to be.
Whether that belief is conscious or unconscious.
Exactly, regardless of whether that belief is conscious or unconscious.
So my actions were basically a mirror reflecting my self-image back at me.
Yes. Research cited in the sources demonstrates this principle clearly. Studies have shown that people who identified themselves as being a voter were significantly more likely to actually vote than those who simply stated that voting was something they intended to do.
Wow, so just framing it as I am a voter versus I intend to vote made a difference.
A significant difference. The shift was in how they saw themselves in relation to the action. It wasn't just about performing the task, it was about internalizing the identity associated with the task.
That makes sense.
The person who incorporates exercise into their identity, who sees themselves as an exerciser or maybe an athletic person, doesn't have to engage in this constant internal debate about whether or not to go to the gym today.
Right, because it's just who they are.
Doing the right thing, the healthy thing, becomes easier because they're simply acting in alignment with the person they already believe themselves to be. When your behavior is fully aligned with your identity, you're not pursuing behavior change in the traditional sense, you're just living consistent with who you genuinely are.
That's incredibly powerful. It moves beyond just wanting to achieve something, like getting fit, to actually becoming the kind of person who is fit. The identity comes first.
And importantly, it's presented as a dynamic, two-way feedback loop. Your habits don't just reflect your identity. Your identity is shaped by your habits.
Okay, how does that work?
Every time you perform a habit, good or bad, you are essentially casting a vote for the type of person you are or want to become. Each workout is a vote for, I am an exerciser. Each time you write is a vote for, I am a writer.
So the actions reinforce the identity.
Exactly. The focus should always be on becoming that type of person, not merely achieving a specific, isolated outcome. The sources are emphatic. Identity change is the North Star of habit change. It's the ultimate guiding principle.
So the ultimate goal isn't just to build a stack of good habits like collecting stamps, but to use those habits intentionally to sculpt your sense of self into the person you truly aspire to be.
Precisely. And to understand how to do that sculpting practically, how to engineer this identity change and build the systems that support it, we need to understand the fundamental science of how habits actually function at a mechanical level.
Okay, let's peel back the layers then and look at the underlying mechanics. The sources break down the process of how any habit forms and operates into 4 simple, interconnected steps. What are they?
Yes, the 4 stages of habits. This is the fundamental loop your brain goes through every single time you perform a habit, whether you realize it or not, and it always follows the same order. Cue, craving, response, and reward.
Cue, craving, response, reward.
Okay, think of it as a continuous feedback loop, constantly learning and reinforcing behavior.
Let's walk through each stage. First up, the cue. What is that exactly?
The cue is the trigger. It's any bit of information in your environment, internal or external, that signals that a reward is potentially available. It initiates the entire process.
Like a notification on your phone. Or feeling stressed.
Exactly. Or think back to our earliest ancestors' cues, like the sight of food, the sound of water, the presence of a mate. Today, we're also highly attuned to cues that predict modern, secondary rewards, like money, fame, praise, social approval, status, or even just a feeling of satisfaction. Our brains are constantly scanning the environment, analyzing for these predictive bits of information.
It's like the brain's alert system. Pay attention. Something important is happening or about to happen related to a potential reward.
Exactly. And that signal leads directly to the second stage, craving.
Craving. Okay, this is the motivational part.
This is the motivational force behind the habit. And here's a key insight from the sources. It's not the reward itself that motivates us in the moment, but the anticipation of the reward. The craving is the desire for a change in state.
A change in state. Can you give an example?
Sure. A smoker doesn't just crave the cigarette itself. They crave the feeling of relief from the tension of the craving, or the feeling of relaxation they anticipate getting from smoking. It's the change from stressed to less stressed, or from craving to satisfied.
So it's the desire for the feeling or the state the habit provides or maybe removes?
Yes. And this is where the neurotransmitter dopamine plays a crucial, often misunderstood role. For a long time, dopamine was simply called the pleasure molecule. But modern science shows it's far more central to motivation, learning, memory, even voluntary movement.
Okay.
Critically for habits, dopamine is released not just when you experience pleasure from the reward, but when you anticipate it. The wanting, the craving, is fueled by dopamine anticipation.
Ah, so dopamine is the fuel in the engine of desire, more than just the pleasure itself.
Correct. The craving is the second stage because it's the feeling or the emotion that drives the actual action. As the sources quote, acknowledging our human nature, we can only be rational and logical after we have been emotional. The feeling comes first, then the thinking or the acting.
Emotion leads to action. Makes sense. What's the third step then?
The third step is the response. This is the actual habit you perform.
The doing part.
Exactly. It can be a thought, like thinking a specific negative thought pattern in response to stress, or a physical action, like reaching for your phone, tying your running shoes, or washing the dishes. The response requires effort, both time and energy, and the response is contingent on your ability. If the behavior is too difficult, you simply cannot perform it. The response is what you do to get the reward, and it always precedes the reward.
Okay, cue, craving response, and finally, the fourth stage. Reward!
The reward is the end goal of every habit cycle. It serves two critical purposes. First, it satisfies the original craving and provides that change in state you were anticipating, relief, pleasure, whatever it was.
And second?
Second, and perhaps more importantly for habit formation, it teaches your brain which actions are worth remembering and repeating in the future. The reward closes the feedback loop, reinforcing the entire cycle.
So our brains are constantly running this loop. Cue, craving, response, reward, figuring out what actions lead to satisfying outcomes and strengthening those pathways.
That's precisely right. The feelings of pleasure and disappointment we experience from the reward act as powerful feedback mechanisms for the brain, constantly distinguishing between actions that are perceived as useful or useless in getting what it wants.
And here's the critical takeaway, I guess.
Here's the critical takeaway from the sources.
Yeah.
If any single one of these four stages is insufficient or missing, a behavior will not reliably become a habit.
Any one of the four.
Any one. If you eliminate the cue, you never start the loop. If you reduce the craving, there's no motivation to act. If you make the response too difficult, you physically can't do it. And if the reward is unsatisfying, your brain simply won't see a reason to repeat the behavior in the future.
Wow. So to build a habit, you need to effectively manage all four stages. You need to make the cue obvious, the craving attractive, the response easy, and the reward satisfying. That sounds suspiciously like the core framework of the entire book.
It does indeed. These four stages form the basis for the 4 laws of behavior change, which the book lays out as practical principles for building better habits and breaking bad ones. The first law is centered around the cue. Make it obvious.
Make it obvious. Okay, what does that really mean in practice? How do you make a cue obvious?
Well, the sources explain that once a habit becomes deeply ingrained and automatic, we actually stop paying conscious attention to the cues that trigger it. The triggers become sort of invisible parts of our environment.
Like what?
Think about the bowl of candy on the kitchen counter, the television remote sitting right next to your favorite chair, or your phone constantly buzzing in your pocket. The urges to act on these cues, grab the candy, turn on the TV, check your phone, can feel like they come out of nowhere because our response is so automatic, so deeply encoded.
It becomes completely autopilot behavior. You don't even think about it.
Exactly. And you can't change something you're not aware of. As the psychologist Carl Jung famously said, and is quoted here, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate."
Wow, that's powerful.
Behavior change fundamentally starts with awareness. You have to become aware of your existing habits, both good and bad, before you have any hope of intentionally changing them.
So the very first step, whether you want to build a good habit or break a bad one, is simply increasing your awareness of what you're currently doing and, crucially, what triggers it.
Precisely. The sources offer practical techniques for increasing this awareness. One intriguing method is pointing and calling, inspired by the safety system used on Japanese railways.
Pointing and calling. How does that work?
Conductors literally point at objects, signals, levers, upcoming obstacles, and call out their actions, verbalizing what they're seeing and doing. Signal is green, lever pulled. This simple act forces them to move from non-conscious processing to conscious awareness, and it dramatically reduces errors.
It's like forcing yourself to acknowledge the cue out loud, making the unconscious conscious.
Yes. Another key technique is the habits scorecard. This is a simple but powerful exercise. You make a list of your daily habits, just running through your typical day from morning to night.
Okay.
And then you go back through the list and mark each habit as positive, plus, negative, or neutral towards the person you want to become, based on your goals and identity.
So it makes everything visible.
Right. This makes your habits visible and helps you identify the cues triggering them throughout your day, making it possible to respond differently. It raises your baseline awareness.
Okay, so once you're aware, how do you make it obvious to actually build good habits?
You intentionally make the cues for good habits highly visible, prominent parts of your environment. The sources explain that habits aren't just triggered by a single specific thing, they become deeply associated with the entire context surrounding the behavior.
The environment itself becomes the cue.
Exactly. The environment itself becomes a powerful cue. People speak quietly in a library, they act cautiously on a dark street. The environment shapes expected behavior. This is captured by Kurt Lewin's equation, B = F, P-E. Behavior is a function of the person in their environment.
So our physical surroundings are constantly whispering instructions to our brains, often without us even noticing.
Often without us even realizing it. We tend to act based on the most obvious option presented by our environment. If a vending machine is the most obvious way to get a snack at work, you're more likely to use it. If healthy food is prepped and sitting right there on the counter when you get home, that cue is more obvious than junk food hidden away in a cupboard.
We think we're making conscious choices, but maybe we're just responding to the easiest, most visible cue.
So many actions are driven by what's immediately available and visible, which means designing your environment is a form of proactive behavior change. It's incredibly powerful.
So how do you design it effectively?
If you want a habit to be a significant part of your life, make its cue a significant part of your environment. Habits that persist often have multiple cues reinforcing them. Think about a smoker. They might see friends smoke, feel stressed, smell smoke, see an ashtray. All these are triggers.
You can use that for good, though.
Absolutely. You can use this principle for good by strategically placing cues for positive habits throughout your surroundings. Leave your running shoes right by the door, put the book you want to read on your pillow, set out your vitamins next to your coffee mug, make the best choice, the most obvious one, when the cue appears.
And applying make it obvious to breaking bad habits, is it just the reverse?
You do the opposite. You cut them off at the source by making the cue invisible. The sources argue very convincingly that relying solely on willpower or resistance to temptation is an ineffective long-term strategy. It's just mentally exhausting.
Yeah, willpower feels finite.
It often is. In the long run, you inevitably become a product of the environment you spend the most time in. Trying to maintain positive habits in an environment saturated with cues for bad habits is incredibly difficult, maybe impossible for most people. The most effective way to break a bad habit is often to make the trigger for that habit invisible.
Addition by subtraction, as the sources call it.
Exactly. Hide the junk food away, perhaps out of sight in a high cupboard or the back of the fridge. Put your phone in another room during focused work time. Unsubscribe from those tempting promotional emails. Remove the cues that trigger the unwanted behavior from your immediate environment.
It's like removing the temptation before it even arises.
This addition by subtraction removes negative influences, making it easier for you to choose alternative, more positive actions without constantly battling temptation. It sounds much less draining than constantly saying no all day long.
It does. It bypasses the need for willpower in the moment of temptation. And the sources provide some great real-world examples of this kind of environment design in action, right?
They do. Some really practical ones.
Like changing spaces entirely.
Yes. The author shares his personal experience of moving his workspace from the couch or the kitchen table to a dedicated office space. Before, his apartment was a jumble of overlapping cues. The couch was for relaxing, but also for working on a laptop. The kitchen table was for eating, but also for working.
Which makes it hard for your brain to switch modes.
Exactly. It made it hard for his brain to distinguish between contexts. Creating a separate office space created a clear dividing line, making it much easier for his brain to associate that specific physical space only with work. He introduced the mantra, one space, one use, to create clear environmental cues for different activities.
One space, one use. I like that. So defining the purpose of a physical space helps define the behavior that happens there.
Precisely. Another example mentioned is trying a new grocery store layout to avoid mindlessly buying unhealthy foods.
How does that work?
In your usual store, you're often on autopilot. Your environment cues your usual route and typical unhealthy grab-and-go items you always buy. Going to a new store disrupts this autopilot, forcing you to be more deliberate and aware of what you're actually putting in your cart.
That's a clever way to break an old pattern by simply changing the environment, short-circuiting the cues.
And even when you can't change environments completely, you can redefine or rearrange your current one. Dedicate a specific corner of a room for exercise, maybe another for reading, even if it's just a chair and a side table. Assigning a specific purpose to a microenvironment within your home helps strengthen the association between that space and the desired habit.
The sources also touch briefly on the Osaka cleaning habit and the Vietnam War heroin study as examples of environment's power.
Yes, the Osaka example, though not detailed in the excerpts, implies creating systems and physical structures that make cleanliness the default or easier option within a public space. The Vietnam War study is a powerful, albeit stark, illustration of environment's power.
What did that show?
Soldiers who became heavily addicted to heroin in Vietnam often managed to quit almost immediately upon returning home. While the addiction certainly had a physical component, the powerful environmental cues in Vietnam, the stress of combat, the social group of other users, the easy availability were removed when they returned to their home environment.
So the context changed dramatically.
Right. This dramatically reduced the triggers and made it much easier to break the habit than it would have been if they'd stayed in Vietnam, surrounded by those cues.
That really underscores how much our behavior is tied to the context we're in. It's not just a matter of personal will. The environment plays a massive role.
It's a critical piece of the puzzle. Understanding that allows us to stop blaming ourselves solely for lack of willpower and start focusing on strategically designing our world for success.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense.
Now let's move on to the second law, which builds on the cue and focuses on the craving. Make it attractive.
Make it attractive. Okay, so we've made the cue visible. How do we make the desire to act on that cue stronger for the right habits and maybe weaker for the bad ones?
Cravings, as we discussed, are driven by the anticipation of the reward. And some things are inherently attractive to us due to our evolutionary wiring.
Like what?
Things like salt, sugar, and fat were scarce and vital for survival in Paleolithic times, so our brains developed strong cravings for them. The modern food industry masterfully exploits this. They engineer products to be hyper-palatable, using things like Oreo sensation, how food feels in your mouth, the texture and dynamic contrast, which refers to foods that have varied sensations, like the crunch of a chip followed by the melt-in-your-mouth sensation.
Wow, they are literally engineering foods to be addictive based on our ancient biology, designing them to hijack our cravings.
They are designing them to be maximally attractive to our built-in cravings. But attraction isn't just biological, it's profoundly social. Humans are fundamentally social creatures, herd animals.
And we want to fit in.
We have a deep-seated need to fit in, to belong, and to earn the respect and approval of others. Historically, being cast out of the tribe was basically a death sentence. Our survival was, for millennia, dependent on collaboration and fitting in with the group.
So behaviors that help us fit in are inherently more attractive to us.
Absolutely. The sources discuss the fascinating Polgar family experiment where the father set out to raise chess prodigies. He didn't just teach them chess, he designed their entire home environment and social world around it.
What does that look like?
The house was filled with chess books, chessboards, pictures of chess champions. Their siblings and parents were constantly engaged in chess. In that context, an obsession with chess was the norm, the path to acceptance and recognition within the family. If you grow up where mastering chess is celebrated, playing chess becomes incredibly attractive.
So we imitate the habits of those around us, especially our closest contacts and the groups we belong to.
Yes, the sources highlight 3 key groups whose habits we are most likely to imitate. The close, our family and closest friends. The many, the majority, the average behavior of the group we're in. And the powerful, those with high status, prestige, or power.
Okay.
The anecdote about the man in Turkey starting smoking is a perfect illustration. When asked why he started, his simple reply was, friends. It always starts with your friends. The desire to bond, to be part of the group, made the behavior attractive, even if it was harmful.
So consciously choosing who you spend time with is a form of habit design in itself. a way to make good habits more attractive.
It's a very powerful form of environment design for making habits attractive. If you surround yourself with people who embody the habits you want, those habits become your new normal, your new attractive behavior, because they align with fitting in with your chosen tribe.
Makes sense. What else makes a habit attractive?
Another powerful strategy is to actively reframe your cravings or consciously reinterpret the feelings associated with a habit in a positive light.
Reframing the internal experience, how does that work?
Yes. The sources reference Alan Carr's approach in The Easy Way to Stop Smoking. He systematically helps smokers reframe the mental associations they have with smoking cues. Instead of thinking a cigarette reduces stress, you learn to internalize the thought, cigarettes don't reduce stress, they actually destroy your nerves.
So you're changing the story your brain tells itself about the habit, changing the perceived benefit or cost.
Exactly. Or consider reframing the frustration you might feel during meditation when your mind inevitably wanders. Instead of seeing it as a failure, ugh, I'm bad at this, you reframe it as an opportunity. My mind wandered. This is a chance to practice returning my attention to my breath.
Turning a negative into a positive cue.
Right. Similarly, pre-game jitters the racing heart, the heightened arousal can be reframed. Instead of thinking, I am nervous, you tell yourself, I'm excited and I'm getting an adrenaline rush that will help me focus. These deliberate shifts in mindset can fundamentally alter the attractiveness of sticking with a difficult habit or trying something new.
It sounds like you're consciously redirecting the motivation generated by the craving towards the desired action, making it feel less like a threat and more like an opportunity.
That's precisely what's happening. By making the association more positive, you strengthen the craving stage of the habit loop, making the desired behavior more appealing and the undesired one less so.
Okay, that's the second law. Make it attractive. What's next?
Now, let's move on to the third law, which focuses on the response stage. Make it easy.
Make it easy. This one feels intuitive. It aligns perfectly with our fundamental human nature, the law of least effort.
It's a core principle of human behavior, absolutely. We are hardwired to gravitate towards the option that requires the least amount of work, the least resistance. Think of water flowing downhill. It always follows the path of least resistance.
Or a garden hose.
Right. If you put a kink in a garden hose, the water flow slows down. You've added friction. Reducing friction allows behavior to flow easily. Energy goes where it's easiest to go.
So to build good habits, we need to ruthlessly eliminate friction. Make the desired action the easiest one possible.
Exactly. You design your environment and your process to make the desired behavior the default, easiest option. Preparing your coffee maker the night before dramatically reduces the friction for having coffee in the morning. Laying out your workout clothes before bed makes exercising just that little bit easier in the morning rush.
Small things that lower the barrier.
Tiny things. The sources mention the example of Japanese electronics manufacturers in the 1970s. They pioneered lean production precisely to remove waste and reduce friction in the assembly process. Redesigning workspaces so tools were always within easy reach led to massive increases in efficiency and product reliability. They made the right way the easy way.
Applying the law of least effort to optimize an entire production line. And this principle applies everywhere now, doesn't it?
Everywhere. Many of the most successful modern services thrive because they dramatically reduce friction. Meal delivery services reduce the friction of planning, shopping, and cooking. Dating apps reduce the friction of meeting new people. Ride-sharing apps reduce the friction of navigating transportation. Text messaging reduce the friction of sending letters.
Voice-activated speakers.
Right. Voice-activated speakers reduce the friction of controlling devices compared to using apps or remote controls. Business, at its heart, is often a quest to figure out how to deliver the same desired result to customers in an easier, more convenient fashion.
Okay, so make good habits easy. What about using this principle to break bad habits? You do the opposite. Increase the friction. Make them harder.
Precisely. You deliberately increase the number of steps or the amount of effort required to perform a bad habit. If you find yourself mindlessly scrolling on your phone late at night, put the phone in a drawer across the room, or maybe even charge it in a different room entirely overnight.
Just adding a few steps.
That little bit of friction, having to physically get up, walk across the room, open the drawer, retrieve the phone, can be enough to interrupt the automatic behavior and give you a crucial moment to make a more conscious choice.
So it's not about needing immense willpower in that moment. It's about making the unwanted behavior slightly inconvenient, leveraging our natural laziness against it.
Right. It leverages our natural laziness, the law of least effort, against the bad habit. The sources mention the extreme hypothetical example from Roger Fisher about nuclear deterrence requiring a launch key to be surgically implanted near someone's heart to make the decision to launch incredibly difficult and personal.
Wow, that's extreme, but illustrates the principle.
While extreme, the core principle is sound. Make the wrong action profoundly difficult or painful to initiate. A more practical historical example given is James Ritty's invention of the cash register back in the late 1800s.
The cash register. How did that increase friction?
Before his machine, employee theft was rampant, and easy cash was simply taken from an open drawer. Ritty's cash register automatically locked the cash and receipts inside, making theft much more difficult and traceable. Employee theft plummeted, leading to massive increases in profit for businesses and the eventual founding of the National Cash Register Company.
He made the bad habit theft functionally impractical, or at least highly inconvenient and risky.
Exactly. And this brings us to the concept of decisive moments. These are critical choices you make throughout your day that are like a fork in the road.
A fork in the road.
Yeah. One path leads down a productive chain of habits, and the other leads down an unproductive one. Choosing between ordering takeout or cooking a healthy meal at home. Deciding whether to drive to the store or bike. Choosing to open your study notes or launch a video game when you sit down at your desk.
These small decisions set the stage for everything that follows, don't they? They have downstream consequences.
They absolutely do. Decisive moments determine the set of options available to your future self. Walking into a specific restaurant limits your food choices to only what's on that menu. Your options become constrained by that initial, often quick decision. Mastering these moments by making the productive path easier at that fork is fundamental because they dictate where your habits will lead you for the next hour or evening or day.
So how do you make it easy to choose the productive path at these decisive moments when you're standing at that fork?
The sources introduce a brilliant and incredibly practical strategy called the 2-minute rule.
The 2-minute rule? Okay, I've heard of this. What's the principle?
The principle is simple. When you start a new habit, it should take less than 2 minutes to do.
Less than 2 minutes? That seems almost trivial. How can that build a significant habit, like exercising for an hour or meditating for 20 minutes?
And that's the beauty, the power of it. The strategy isn't about finishing the task, not initially. It's about drastically lowering the barrier to entry, making it incredibly easy to start.
Okay.
You use gateway habits, tiny, almost effortless actions that naturally lead you down the desired productive path. Read before bed each night becomes read 1 page.
Just 1 page.
Do 30 minutes of yoga becomes take out my yoga mat. Study for class becomes open my notes. Fold the laundry becomes fold 1 pair of socks.
You remove the intimidation of the whole task by focusing only on the simplest possible first step, making it almost ridiculously easy to say yes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Anyone can perform these tiny 2-minute actions. And here's the psychological kicker. Once you've started doing the right thing, once you've taken that first step, it's psychologically much easier to continue than it was to start from zero inertia.
Momentum builds.
Right. Doing less than you hoped is always better than doing nothing at all. The 2-minute rule just gets you over that activation energy hurdle of starting, which is often the hardest part.
And how do you build up from that 2-minute start to the full habit you actually want? You don't just read 1 page forever?
The sources describe this process as habit shaping. Once you've mastered consistently doing the first 2 minutes of the smallest version of the habit, reading 1 page every night, taking out the yoga mat every morning, you gradually advance to an intermediate step.
Okay.
Maybe read for 5 minutes or do 1 sun salutation. You still focus on mastering the first 2 minutes of that slightly larger stage before moving on again. You're scaling up the difficulty incrementally, always keeping the focus on making the initial action effortless, because starting is the crucial part that builds consistency.
So you standardize the start of the habit first, make that automatic before you try to optimize the entire performance.
Precisely. Standardize before you optimize. You cannot improve a habit that doesn't yet exist. Your first priority is to get it started consistently, make that entry point easy, and then you can worry about making the habit better or doing more.
Makes sense. Get the reps in first.
And the sources also note that ritualizing the beginning of a process, making that 2-minute start a consistent ritual, makes it much more likely that you'll seamlessly slip into a state of deep focus or productive work afterwards.
And preparing your environment beforehand plays a huge role in making that start easy, right? priming it.
Yes. This is where priming the environment for future use comes in. It means intentionally preparing your environment beforehand to make the next desired action effortless.
Like laying out workout clothes.
Exactly. Or the example given is Oswald Knuckles' simple but effective strategy of resetting the room. When he finishes watching TV, he doesn't just leave things where they are. He puts the remote back in its place, arranges the pillows neatly, folds the blanket. While the shower is warming up, he might quickly wipe down the toilet.
So cleaning up isn't just about tidiness in the moment. It's a proactive step to make the next positive action easier in that space.
Exactly. The purpose is not merely to tidy up, but to actively prepare the environment for the next desired action. As Knuckles is quoted, the goal is that when I walk into a room, everything is in its right place. This intentional priming makes the next positive action you want to take in that space, whether it's reading, working out, having a productive conversation, significantly easier because the environment isn't fighting against you. It's already set up to support you. It reduces future friction.
Okay, so we've covered making the cue obvious, the craving attractive, and the response easy. That leaves the final crucial law: make it satisfying.
Make it satisfying. This law is built on a fundamental principle of human and really all animal behavior. We are simply, undeniably more likely to repeat a behavior when the experience is immediately satisfying.
The reward part of the loop, and the essential challenge here, as we touched on earlier, is that many of the habits that are best for us in the long run have delayed satisfaction. They aren't immediately rewarding.
Absolutely. We live in what scientists call a delayed return environment. The rewards for good habits, saving money, exercising consistently, eating healthy, studying diligently, often come much, much later.
Weeks, months, years.
Right. Your paycheck arrives in weeks, significant weight loss takes months, retirement savings take decades to compound, mastering a skill takes years of practice.
But our brains didn't evolve in this kind of delayed return world.
Precisely. Our Paleolithic brains are wired for an immediate return environment. Survival for our ancestors depended on prioritizing the present. Find food now, seek shelter now, avoid predators now. This evolutionary bias means our brains are much, much more sensitive to immediate rewards than delayed ones.
We discount the future.
Heavily. A reward that is certain right now is almost always valued more highly than a potentially larger reward far off in the future. This fundamental mismatch creates a huge problem for building good modern habits because the consequences of bad habits are often delayed, while the rewards are immediate.
Like the immediate stress relief from smoking, even though the serious health problems are years or decades down the line.
Or the immediate pleasure of overeating comfort food, while the negative health impacts like weight gain or heart disease are delayed. Or the immediate gratification of unsafe sex, with the potential for STDs being delayed. The sources are clear. You cannot rely solely on good intentions for your future you when present you is facing a decision point and craving immediate comfort or pleasure.
Instant gratification usually wins that battle.
Typically, yes. The more immediate pleasure you get from an action, the source is warned, the more strongly you should question whether it truly aligns with your long-term goals and the person you want to become.
So how do we overcome this powerful biological bias towards the immediate? How do we make delayed return habits stick?
You train yourself to delay gratification, but crucially, you do it by working with human nature, not trying to brute force your way against it with sheer willpower, which often fails. The solution proposed is to consciously engineer a little bit of immediate pleasure into the habits that pay off in the long run.
Okay.
And conversely, engineer a little bit of immediate pain into the habits that don't serve you.
Adding immediate gratification to delayed gratification habits and immediate pain to bad habits.
Yeah.
That sounds counterintuitive, but fascinating. How does it work?
It's about bridging the gap between the action and the long-term reward. The sources provide a fantastic example with a hand-washing study in Karachi, Pakistan. Researchers wanted to increase hand-washing rates to improve public health, reduce disease.
Okay.
They partnered with Procter & Gamble to supply a premium, pleasant-smelling Safeguard soap to one neighborhood, while others got basic soap or no intervention. Hand-washing rates soared in the Safeguard group because using the soap became a slightly more enjoyable, more satisfying sensory experience in the moment.
Just because the soap smelled nice?
Essentially, yes. That little bit of immediate sensory pleasure made the habit more satisfying, and this led to significantly reduced rates of diarrhea, pneumonia, skin infections. Even 6 years later, long after the free premium soap was gone, Over 95% of households in that group maintained the high hand-washing rates because the habit had become deeply ingrained, reinforced by that initial period of immediate, enhanced satisfaction.
It's remarkable. A small increase in immediate satisfaction had a long-term population-level health impact, just making the process slightly more pleasant.
It's a powerful illustration. Another example given is a couple saving for a big trip to Europe. They labeled their savings account "Trip to Europe." Whenever they skipped eating out or made another small sacrifice to save money, they would immediately transfer the saved amount, say $50, into that Trip to Europe account.
Okay.
The immediate reward wasn't actually being in Europe, of course, that was still far off, but the immediate reward was the satisfaction of seeing the Europe fund grow, seeing tangible, immediate progress towards their exciting long-term goal. That reinforced the saving habit.
And the sources emphasize making sure that immediate reward aligns with your identity and long-term goals, right? Not undermining them.
Absolutely critical point. Giving yourself a massage after exercising reinforces the identity of being a healthy, self-caring person. Rewarding yourself with a giant bowl of ice cream might send a mixed message and undermine the health goal.
Right.
Taking a relaxing bubble bath or going for a nice walk after diligently saving money aligns with the goal of financial well-being and calm. Immediately rewarding yourself by buying a new expensive jacket conflicts directly with the saving goal. The immediate reward should reinforce the type of person you are trying to become.
So intrinsic rewards like feeling better, having more energy, feeling proud, eventually take over as the primary motivators. But adding these small, aligned, external, immediate satisfactions helps you get started and maintain momentum through the initial, often unsatisfying phase.
Exactly. It helps bridge that gap until the longer-term benefits become apparent or the habit becomes automatic.
What about the flip side? Making bad habits unsatisfying by adding immediate pain or consequence. How do you do that effectively?
One of the simplest and most effective ways the sources mention is through habit tracking.
Just tracking your habits. How does that make them satisfying or unsatisfying?
It works for the fourth law in two ways. First, seeing your progress, your streak, grow is inherently satisfying. It provides visual proof of your hard work and commitment. Crossing items off a list or marking X's on a calendar feels good in the moment. It's a mini reward.
Okay, I get that part.
Second, and perhaps more powerfully for avoiding bad habits or sticking to good ones, missing a day and breaking the streak creates a form of immediate pain or dissatisfaction. That empty box on your tracker stands out. It feels like a small failure, motivating you to avoid that feeling by staying consistent. You don't want to break the chain.
So habit tracking turns consistency itself into a visible, satisfying reward and inconsistency into a visible, slightly painful consequence right there in the moment.
Exactly. And to add more significant immediate pain to bad habits you really want to break, the sources highly recommend using an accountability partner or even creating a formal habit contract.
Accountability. Knowing someone else is watching and holding you to your word.
It's an incredibly powerful motivator rooted deeply in our social nature. Knowing someone is observing your behavior and expects you to follow through means that failure isn't just a private disappointment, it has an immediate social cost.
Like letting someone down or looking bad.
Right. You risk being perceived as unreliable or lazy by someone whose opinion you value. You're failing not just promises to yourself, but promises to others. The sources share the compelling story of Brian Harris, an entrepreneur who used a habit contract to successfully lose weight.
What does he do?
He set up specific, immediate financial penalties with his trainer and his wife. He had to pay his trainer $100 if he missed his food logging targets. He had to pay his wife $500 if he failed to weigh himself daily.
Wow, steep penalties.
And his ultimate and perhaps most personally painful immediate consequence was having to wear his rival football team's hat for a whole day if he missed his weekly sprint targets.
Ouch. Immediate pain leveraged through social embarrassment and financial consequences.
And apparently it worked incredibly well because the cost of skipping the desired habit, or doing the bad habit, was immediate and significant in that moment, outweighing the delayed gratification of breaking the rules or eating off plan.
That makes sense. Even without formal contracts, just having an accountability partner you check in with regularly.
Yeah, like comedian Margaret Cho doing a song a day challenge with a friend, that adds that immediate social pressure. You don't want to tell your friend you didn't do it. You can even automate this, like Thomas Frank using Buffer to automatically send an embarrassing tweet if he missed his wake-up time, publicly broadcasting his failure and creating immediate social pain.
Huh, that's creative.
The key is to make the consequence of breaking a good habit or doing a bad one immediate and painful or inconvenient enough in the moment to counteract the immediate satisfaction the bad habit might provide, or the inertia against starting the good habit.
So the 4 laws: make it obvious, make it attractive, make it easy, and make it satisfying, provide a really practical step-by-step framework grounded in the science of how habits actually work, giving you concrete tools to build any desired habit or break an unwanted one.
They provide the structure, absolutely, but the sources add another crucial layer of nuance that determines how effective these laws will ultimately be for you specifically: finding the right game to play.
Finding the right game. What does that mean? How do our natural abilities, our genes, our predispositions fit into this whole framework?
The core idea here is that competence is highly context-dependent. You might have a natural aptitude for one activity, say pattern recognition in coding, or maybe spatial reasoning for design, but be relatively unskilled in another, like, I don't know, playing a musical instrument or long-distance running.
We all have different strengths and weaknesses.
Right. The sources argue that being well-suited to a particular task or area is not just helpful, but often crucial for achieving high levels of success, especially at the elite level. It's much harder to be world-class at something you have zero natural aptitude for.
So it's about aligning your effort with where you have some kind of natural advantage or inclination, playing to your strengths.
Precisely. Genes, the sources explain, do not determine your destiny, but they absolutely influence your areas of opportunity. They predispose you to certain skills or preferences. They don't predetermine your outcome.
Okay.
The areas where you have a natural inclination or aptitude are often the areas where building the necessary habits will feel less like a constant struggle and more like a natural fit, which connects right back to the 4th law: make it satisfying. The process itself is more likely to feel enjoyable or engaging if it aligns with your innate abilities.
So choosing the right environment, the right activity, makes the habit-building process inherently easier and more sustainable because it feels better to do it.
Exactly. Pick the right habit that aligns with your natural abilities and preferences, and progress often feels easier, more fluid. Pick the wrong habit, one that goes completely against your grain, and life can feel like a constant uphill battle. A grind where the necessary habits are profoundly unsatisfying and incredibly difficult to maintain long-term.
The sources use a sports analogy, right?
Yes, the clear physical example of different body types being better suited for different sports. Michael Phelps' unique build, long torso, short legs, huge wingspan, perfect for swimming, versus Hicham El Guerrouj's light frame, ideal for middle-distance running. Genes provide an advantage or a disadvantage depending entirely on the specific context, the specific game being played.
So the takeaway isn't that talent replaces effort, because obviously both Phelps and El Guerrouj worked incredibly hard.
Not at all. The takeaway is that talent directs effort towards where it's most likely to yield significant results and feel more rewarding.
That's the crucial distinction. Genes don't eliminate the need for hard work. They clarify what to work hard on for the best return on effort. They help you identify the environments or activities where your natural strengths give you a comparative advantage, where the process of building mastery will be less painful and more rewarding, making the application of the 4 laws significantly more effective for you.
Right. Play a game that favors your strengths. And if you can't find one that fits perfectly, the sources suggest, then try to create a game or carve out a niche that is uniquely suited to your specific combination of skills.
Okay, so you understand the mechanics. You're applying the 4 laws. You found the right game where your abilities give you an edge. Is that the end of the road? Smooth sailing from there? Or are there downsides or ongoing challenges with habit building, even when you're doing everything right?
There absolutely are. The sources address a significant challenge that inevitably arises once habits become automatic and ingrained.
Boredom. Boredom. The silent killer of consistency, perhaps.
It's presented as arguably the single greatest threat to long-term success and the maintenance of habits, especially when you're aiming for mastery. While automaticity is the goal of habit building, freeing up mental energy by making behaviors effortless, it also means the habit can become routine, predictable, less interesting, and therefore less satisfying over time.
Because the novelty wears off.
Exactly. The sources discuss the concept of the Goldilocks rule. Our peak motivation and engagement occur when working on tasks that are right on the edge of our current abilities.
Not too easy, not too hard.
Right. Challenging enough to be interesting and push us, but not so difficult that they feel overwhelming and impossible. This is the Goldilocks zone, where you are most likely to enter a state of flow.
That state of being completely absorbed in the activity where time seems to disappear.
Yes. Scientists suggest flow happens when a task is roughly 4% beyond your current ability, just enough challenge to require your full attention and feel engaging. But even operating the Goldilocks zone, if you repeat the exact same task the same way over and over, eventually it becomes too easy, too predictable, and the enemy emerges.
Boredom.
And that's where people often fall off.
It's a major hurdle. The anecdote about the weightlifting coach is incredibly powerful here. The difference between the truly elite athletes and everyone else isn't just talent or even work ethic in the beginning. It often comes down to who can handle the boredom of training every day, doing the same lifts over and over and over.
That really challenges the romantic idea that success is just about finding your passion and then everything is effortless fun. It's about showing up even when the passion isn't firing on all cylinders. That's the critical distinction made. Successful people feel the lack of motivation, the boredom, the resistance, just like everyone else. The difference is they find a way to show up anyway. Professionals, as the source's notes, stick to the schedule. Amateurs let life and their feelings of boredom or low motivation get in the way.
You have to push through the boring parts.
To achieve true excellence and maintain habits required for mastery, you have to learn to embrace, or, as the sources provocatively put it, fall in love with boredom. You have to find satisfaction in the process itself, even when it's repetitive.
Which makes sense when you think about things designed to be addictive, like social media feeds or slot machines. They use variable rewards specifically to prevent boredom, right?
Exactly. They exploit our desire to avoid boredom by providing unpredictable hits of satisfaction. You never know when the next reward, a great post, a small win, is coming. The sweet spot of desire for keeping engagement high is often around a 50-50 success-failure rate because the unpredictability keeps us hooked. Consistent habits, by definition, are highly predictable, which is their strength for automaticity, but also their weakness against boredom over the very long term.
So working in the Goldilocks zone helps keep things challenging, but you still need to manage the inherent repetition.
Yes. And there's another potential downside, or maybe a dark side, of habits specifically when you're pursuing mastery or elite performance.
Like, yeah.
While automatic habits are absolutely necessary for high performance, they free up precious mental energy so you can focus on higher-level strategy and decision-making. They are not sufficient for exceptional top-tier mastery or continuous improvement. You cannot just blindly repeat the same automatic habits forever and expect to keep getting better indefinitely at the highest levels.
So just showing up and doing the work, even consistently, isn't enough for perpetual growth.
Not for pushing the absolute boundaries. Mastery requires a combination of automatic habits and deliberate practice, reflection, and analysis.
Okay, explain that distinction.
Elite athletes like marathon world record holder Eliud Kipchoge or Olympic swimmer Katie Ledecky have incredibly consistent habits. They show up to train every single day, automatically. But their process goes way beyond just repetition. They work meticulously with coaches, analyzing massive amounts of data, reviewing video of their performance, getting feedback, and making conscious, deliberate adjustments to their technique and training system.
It's constant refinement based on feedback.
Exactly. This is reflection and adjustment, not just mindless repetition. You need the habits for consistency and automaticity, but you need deliberate practice and analysis for continuous improvement and pushing beyond your current plateau. Habits get you in the game. Deliberate practice helps you win.
And the identity piece we talked about earlier, which is so powerful for building habits initially, can actually become a trap later on, hindering mastery.
It can become a source of pride that hinders growth. While repeatedly performing habits builds evidence for the identity you want, I am a runner because you run every day, that same strong identity can make you resistant to constructive feedback, unwilling to admit weak spots, or hesitant to change your beliefs or methods even when they are no longer serving your growth towards the next level.
Because changing would feel like betraying your identity.
Potentially, yes. If you strongly identify as someone who does things this specific way, you might unconsciously deny evidence that another approach is better, because adopting it conflicts with your current self-image. You have to remember that your identity is, or should be, a dynamic thing, not fixed in stone. You need the flexibility to let it evolve as you grow, to shed parts of your old identity to embrace the next level of mastery.
So habits build the foundation and get you started, maybe get you quite far. But for true, ongoing excellence, you need intentional analysis, a strategy to confront boredom, and the humility to let your identity adapt and grow.
Exactly. The sources also mention, just briefly as a bonus, that the book goes on to cover practical applications of these core principles in specific domains like business and parenting, hinting at the broader utility of the framework beyond just personal self-improvement habits.
It sounds like the framework is designed to be fundamentally applicable across many different areas of life where behavior change or skill development is needed.
It is presented that way. And as we bring this deep dive towards a close, it's worth circling back briefly to that concept of satisfaction and how we perceive it. The sources share a powerful little equation. Satisfaction, liking, wanting.
Satisfaction equals liking minus wanting. Okay, unpack that. What does that mean in the context of habits and maybe just life in general?
It speaks to the relativity of happiness and satisfaction. The author reflects on his own journey. Getting his first 1,000 email subscribers felt incredibly satisfying, a huge milestone. Years later, getting 1,000 subscribers per day felt normal, expected.
The baseline shifted.
Exactly. His results, liking what he had compounded dramatically, but his experience of satisfaction was perhaps less intense in that moment because his expectations, his wants, had also increased exponentially along the way. The pain you experience from failure or disappointment is often directly correlated to the height of your prior expectation.
So if your wants constantly outpace your likes,
If your wants constantly outpace your likes, the things you are currently experiencing or have achieved, you will always be left feeling unsatisfied, no matter how much external success you achieve. The sources suggest that peace and contentment often occur when you learn to simply observe what is happening without immediately translating those observations into problems that need fixing or gaps that need filling, reducing the wanting part of the equation.
that's a really profound thought to sit with. Not turning observations into problems, accepting the like without immediately increasing the want.
And finally, the sources reiterate a core truth. Your actions are the ultimate, undeniable reveal of your true motivations and priorities, regardless of what you say. If something is genuinely a priority for you, but you never seem to take action on it, then, despite what you might tell yourself or others, you don't truly want it enough in the moments of decision, when faced with the friction or the immediate gratification of an alternative.
Actions speak louder than words, essentially.
Reward comes after sacrifice. The response always precedes the reward, and self-control, while sometimes necessary, feels difficult precisely because resisting a craving in the moment isn't inherently satisfying. It doesn't resolve the underlying craving, it just forces you to ignore it, which takes energy. Making the good habit easy and satisfying is a more sustainable path.
So the book, drawing from all these principles and stories, presents itself as a practical guide using the 4 laws. Make it obvious, attractive, easy, and satisfying to build powerful systems for better habits across your personal life, your family, your work, wherever you want to improve.
Yes, fundamentally shifting your focus from chasing fleeting outcomes to mastering the daily process, and from simply performing actions to intentionally building an identity aligned with your highest aspirations. That's the core value proposition we see unpacked in these sources, a systematic way to understand and intentionally shape your behavior rather than feeling like you're just subject to random chance or fate.
This has been a truly fascinating deep dive into how these tiny shifts, these atomic habits, can indeed create massive transformations over time. We've explored the surprising power of compounding even the smallest daily actions, the critical need to persevere through that visible valley of disappointment, and the profound shift from a purely goal-oriented mindset to a systems-oriented one, anchored in cultivating a desired identity.
And we've laid out the practical blueprint derived from the sources. Understanding the 4 stages of any habit, cue, craving, response, reward, and then applying the 4 laws of behavior change, making the triggers obvious or invisible, the desired actions attractive by engineering craving and social norms, the responses easy by reducing friction and starting ridiculously small with the 2-minute rule, and the rewards immediately satisfying to reinforce the loop.
We've also looked at the important nuances of finding the right environment and activities where your natural abilities give you an edge, playing the right game, and confronting the inevitable challenge of boredom in the long pursuit of mastery, which requires not just showing up consistently, but also deliberate practice, reflection, and the willingness to let your identity evolve.
These are the key insights, drawn directly from the provided excerpts, offering you, the listener, a comprehensive glimpse into the practical, powerful, and deeply human framework presented in Atomic Habits. It really focuses on why this approach might resonate and what core mechanics it offers.
It really offers a path, it seems, to move from that feeling of life directing you, where maybe unconscious forces or environmental defaults drive your actions, to actively directing your own life by understanding and intentionally shaping your habits and the systems around you.
Taking control of the process.
Exactly. And that leaves us with a final provocative thought for you to consider as you move forward. If our environment and the identity we cultivate play such a huge role in shaping our daily actions, and by extension our long-term outcomes, how much of your current life is actually a result of your conscious, deliberate choices versus the unconscious systems you've built, or perhaps just allowed to be built around you by default?
That's a challenging question.
And if, as the sources suggest, you become a product of your environment in the long run, how intentional are you being right now about designing and creating the environment, the physical spaces, the social circles, the information you consume that will shape the person you want to become in the future?